Hello, everybody. It's Dr. Kevin Connors. Welcome to another episode of Holistic Health Hour, where we do our best to answer your questions. Remember, if you have questions, you can add them to the chat, which I better open the chat right now and get that going. Connect the chat. So feel free to chat in your questions, or if you want to have a better chance of your question getting answered, go to Holistic Health Hour, holistichealthhour.com, and you can put your question in beforehand, and that's your best chance of getting the question answered. But feel free to chat in your questions. Also, a reminder to go to our website, connorsclinic.com, where you'll find a plethora of questions already answered. Many videos go along with those questions, and our blog posts with a really nice search app that can search for those questions. But without further ado, let's get on to our questions. First question, whilst researching details on tumors, I came across an article that stated that due to the presence of choline in eggs, it can cause prostate cancer. Yet, we are instructed that choline is a necessary nutrient for autism sufferers. What about choline in eggs causing prostate cancer? I always thought that it would be caused from grain fed chickens and that eggs from grass fed chickens would be safe. Here's the link to an article I found. While I would agree that there has been some research that choline, that egg consumption, let's say that egg consumption can be linked to an increase in prostate cancer and some other cancers, um, uh, I question the research quite honestly. If you understand um, the 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 choline pathway. So choline goes into your cells through a transporter in the cell membrane, and then it is converted to multiple things, and it's necessary for a lot of different things. It's converted to betaine, which is trimethylglycine, and then from that helps with what's called the methionine cycle. If anybody's ever had their genetics done, or if you want to learn more about the methionine cycle and the importance of that, and how you convert B12 to cobalamin, and how you use cobalamin and the MMT pathway, and the, the pathways that help convert um, homocysteine and get rid of homocysteine. That's part of the methionine cycle. So choline is a helper in that cycle, and it's dependent upon choline. Choline also in the cell converts to phosphatidylcholine, which is an absolute essential fat that helps with cell membrane production and with brain function completely, and with neural function. And then also choline converts to acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter. So choline is a necessary nutrient in our body. So when you see, and I've seen these studies that say eggs are bad for prostate cancer patients and things, the thing that is missing in the study is um, number one, other factors. There's other factors. When you talk about dietary factors with cancer, um, they're ignoring any other factors that whatever that person is going through. I think the one study that this person who asked the question is referring to showed that eating more than 3 eggs a week increased prostate cancer um, chances in men and risks in men. Well, there's just so many variables that go on in a study like that differences in lifestyle can make. Not to mention what you mentioned. What is the quality of eggs, if it even is eggs that a person is eating? Are they grass-fed eggs? Are they eggs that are fed with feeds that have all sorts of chemicals and in them grains that are uh, GMO grains? Is that an issue? And then it was just hypothesized that it was choline. Now I can see where excess choline could be an issue with people that have serious issues with pancreatic function, because In order for choline to break down to function in the methionine pathway, it needs an enzyme, and deficiency in that enzyme could cause issues. Um, you also have issues. Choline, in order to break down to phosphatidylcholine, needs energy, it's dependent on different gene pathways and such. So there could be an issue with breakdown of any nutrient. Um, but I'm a little bit sus of the studies that showed eggs as a culprit in cancer. In all our testing over the years with causes of cancer, when we do kinesiology testing, cheek swab testing for pieces of diet with cancer, egg has never come up. Now, I will say egg can be the protein in eggs. A person can develop antibodies against. So if they have major gut issues and leaky gut, problems, it's easy to develop antibodies to even good foods. So proteins that are in even foods that are good for us, um, including eggs, you can develop antibodies. You can have antibodies to the protein in eggs, and then when you eat eggs, if you do have those antibodies, you will cause an inflammatory reaction in the gut. So, not to say that eggs are great for everyone. You should, if you do notice any issues with eggs, or if you do have inflammatory conditions, getting a food sensitivity panel that will test for IgG and IgA reactions, antibodies to eggs would be in order, would be a smart thing to test for. But as far as eggs being a cause of cancer, I'm a little sus of that study. And I don't know that it's choline. Um, you know, I really struggle with that. You look at the pathway that choline breaks down is called from a metabolic standpoint, it's called the Kennedy pathway. So you could look up that pathway, and there can be different gene issues that it could possibly be producing too much methionine, and it's actually the methionine that is feeding the cancer. There's different thoughts about that, but I don't even know that the study is valid. So you got to be careful with some of the studies that you read. Next part of that question were, what about head tumors? Can eating eggs cause or exacerbate head tumors? Again, I think I answered that question. I don't think eggs are an issue. If you really want to know for your specific cancer and have us test you, then doing cheek swab testing would be really in order to see what diet could be feeding your cancer. So if you read anything about, what we believe about a diet and cancer, I don't think that there's a one size fits all with cancer. Yeah, there's certain things that in general you'd want to stay away from that I have addressed on other questions like dairy and things because there's growth factors in it. But as far as specifically what could be dietarily feeding a person's cancer, what is that fuel source of that cancer? The only way that I know to get specific with it is our cheek swab testing. And you can find more information on that on our website, connorsclinic.com. Next question. I was diagnosed with Lyme disease and several co-infections several years ago. I've done several rounds of a few different antibiotics over a period of 2 years. I most likely have been in phase 3 Lyme for a while. So obviously this person is reading our information on Lyme because I came up with that. Phase 3. Phase 3 Lyme is when you're in an autoimmune condition. So you may not even have presence of any active antigen, meaning living organism. The Borrelia and co-infections may not even be physically present in that person's body anymore. But what those things have done is sparked the production of self-antibodies. So that person has antibodies to self-tissue. That is, they have an autoimmune disease. That's what's called phase 3 Lyme. I've done many supplements and homeopathics over the years. Now I know not to take the immune boosting ones. So, of course, you don't take immune boosting supplements at all if you have an autoimmune disease, because when you stimulate your immune system and you have antibodies to self-tissue, what are you going to do? You're going to kill that which you have antibodies against first, which is yourself. I've done daily Rife treatments for 6 months and infrared sauna. I've eaten a clean, organic, gluten, and dairy-free diet for years. I've done bowel, kidney, and liver cleanses along with colonics. I've done a lot of things over the years. I've not seen much improvement and seem to be getting worse. The Lyme doctor I was seeing and working with in Wisconsin retired. My main symptoms are um, raging aches in arms and legs, joint pain in knees, brain fog, lack of energy, occasional sensitive skin. What would you suggest? So when you have uh, pain in your extremities that tends to move around, when you have brain fog, when you have lack of energy, a sensitivity in your skin that tends to move around. It's not like I have sensitivity at this one spot right here between my thumb and my finger, and I have loss of sensitivity there, and it's then it's probably a peripheral nerve issue. You damage the peripheral nerve that feeds that area right there. But when it moves around, you have this weird sensitivity in your skin that's different. It's not constant. It can be in different spaces and such, along with these other symptoms, as this person pointed out. Most likely, you're dealing with inflammation that's in the brain itself. So, if you have damage in the brain, if you have inflammation that's in the brain, it's going to affect where those neurons are going, or it's going to affect. So, if I have in the parietal lobe of my brain, that's my sensory part of the brain. You have left and right parietal lobes. Your left parietal lobe controls the sensory, is getting communication with the sensory of the right side of the body, and vice versa. If I have inflammation in my right parietal lobe today, then I could have sensory issues in my left side of my body. Pain, hot and cold sensation, weird tingling, all sorts of weird, any type of sensory issues. So it's very common that post Lyme disease, post vaccine injury, post heavy metal toxicity, post concussion, that we end up with inflammation in the brain. And inflammation in the brain long term can lead to damage to the brain's immune system called the microglial cells. That's called microglial priming. And worst case scenario, you can end up developing antibodies to neural tissue. So you can't really test for microglial priming. That really has to do with the coordination of subjective findings. But you can test for autoantibodies to neural tissue. That is a Cyrex Array 7X test. So that's what I would recommend for a person if they came to me with this condition. I'd say, let's get a Cyrex Array 7X. Also, I'd probably get a Cyrex Array 5 because that tests for other antibodies. Again, for instance, I suspect, reading your information, that I have an autoimmune disease. I suspect that I'm in phase 3 Lyme. Okay, but what antibodies do you have? What self-antibodies are we dealing with? Because that's how you would then, work up a treatment plan for the person. If the person has no neurological antibodies, but let's say they have, antibody, rheumatoid factor or something. Okay, so you're in an early stage of rheumatoid arthritis, then you want to be looking for, different triggers that are going to be affecting that, which may be very different than what could be affecting neurological antibodies. So the first thing would be to get a more proper diagnosis, and that would be to get some antibody testing. So I'd suggest getting a Cyrex Array 5 and a Cyrex Array 7X. If those are all clean, that would be a really good thing. And that would tell us that we could dial it back a little bit, that we're dealing with. It doesn't mean you don't still have, horrible symptoms, but it's probably due to microglial priming. I do have a good video on that. I mentioned that multiple times in the Holistic Health Hour. If you go to our website, connorsclinic.com, and you search neuroinflammation, you'll see a video. It's about a half-hour long video on microglial priming, and it does go through some care options with that too. I'd maybe start with that. And I suspect you're probably on one of our courses, unless you just read my books. on so you understand autoimmune disease. But I'd highly recommend our autoimmune chronic disease and autoimmune course as well. Okay, questions from the chat. Any remedy for burning mouth symptoms? This was a question that came in last week on the chat as well. Burning mouth symptoms and burning mouth syndrome, again, you would be right in line. It's most likely an autoimmune condition. It can be from an issue with product glands. It can be from food deficiencies. You got to dig into it. You got to, and I don't mean to hound this with everybody, but you got to find a practitioner. You contact us and schedule a case review with me, or find a local practitioner if you're more apt to feel comfort with that, and have somebody that will dig to find causes. So most of the time, people get frustrated because they go to their GP and they have a symptom like the questions you guys are asking, and then maybe they'll run a CBC and a complete metabolic panel, and it's within, most of them are within normal lab ranges, and they say, we don't know what's wrong with you, call a psychologist. It's very unfortunate. It's very, that's why you're seeking alternative care. But you need to find a functional medicine doctor that doesn't do something similar. It's not just, oh, we're going to throw this supplement at it or this supplement at it, but they're going to dig to find some causes. And that's through going through kind of what we're talking about on these calls, a pattern of understanding differential diagnosis. So you're going, well, what could it be? So you're thinking out loud. You got to find a practitioner that is willing to put on a Sherlock Holmes hat and go, well, what could this be? Okay, burning mouth syndrome. Could it be a parotid gland issue? Sure, it could be. Could this person have, something as simple as sensitivity to something they're putting in their mouth, like toothpaste or something? Could they have a sensitivity to the mercury that's in their fillings? Could they have a sensitivity to, there's just a plethora of different things that you want to test for. So digging to that cause, there's, again, bottom line, there's always a cause, and you have to dig to find out what that cause is. Next question from a Facebook user. Is there a test brand you recommend over others for food allergies? I highly prefer the Cyrex lab, Cyrex. If you're one of our course members, which our courses are $50, you guys, right now, but you can order labs through the course. And we do not have any up price for our labs. So we don't make 1 penny off our labs. So you could order if you're a course member, you could order a lab through the course. And then if you want to go over it, then you'll have to pay to talk to me to go over it. But the Cyrex 10 lab, the Cyrex Array 10 is the food sensitivity panel. But that's assuming that the person is already gluten-free, because it doesn't test for all the gliadin peptides. So take a step back to understand that. So gliadin is the protein in gluten. But the protein in gluten, gliadin, is a very long chain protein. So a protein is a chain of amino acids, a sequence of amino acids. That's what a protein is. And I don't remember how many amino acids are in gliadin, but it's well over 100. And then when you eat that gliadin, that gluten, that bread that you're eating, that gliadin protein gets broken down through enzymes. So you have enzymes secreted by your pancreas that basically act like scissors and cut up that protein. So if you think of that chain of amino acids kind of like a pearl necklace, so it's this necklace with 150 different pearls on it. It's cutting, the enzymes are cutting up that pearl necklace into sections. Well, a section of a protein is called a peptide. So you could have a 15-chain peptide, a 27-chain peptide, a 10-chain peptide, and you shouldn't have any of these peptides get across. They should all be too big to get across your gut border, unless they're only 2 amino acids long or smaller. So ultimately, every protein that you eat, you in a perfect world, we wouldn't have food sensitivities, because if we didn't have any gut damage, the proteins that we eat would get broken down to amino acids. Now they're not recognized as gliadin or gluten or dairy or egg or anything else. They're just amino acids. So then those single amino acids get absorbed across the gut border. Then your body uses those amino acids to create enzymes, to create other proteins, to create whatever that cell needs for that cell to function. So our cells use amino acids. They're not using peptides, nor are they using proteins from food sources. We are supposed to eat food. It's supposed to break down into amino acids. We absorb the amino acids, that our cells use those amino acids to make the correct proteins, the correct enzymes from those amino acids that we need to function. Problem is when we have damaged gut walls, we have things get across the gut wall that are larger than, two amino acids bonded together, called a dipeptide. They're larger peptides, or they're full proteins. So some people have contacted me and go, "Oh, no, I've had a food sensitivity tested before, and I'm not sensitive to gluten." Well, let me look at the test. Well, it's only a gliadin test. Well, gliadin is this 100-chain, amino acid. You have to have a pretty darn damaged gut for that size of amino acid to get across the gut wall for your body to make antibodies against, for you then to show positive antibodies against gliadin as an intact protein. So then if that was the case, we know you have really bad damaged gut. Most of the time, you have antibodies against the peptides. So there's not very many labs that will test for the gliadin peptides. So that's why I recommend the Cyrex labs. So if you go, "Hey, I'm already gluten-free already, I just need to see what other foods that I am sensitive against," well, then I'd say do the Cyrex Array 10. But if the person's like, "Well, I'm not gluten-free, but I know I have gut issues," then you got to start with the Cyrex Array 3, and then go to the Cyrex Array 4, and then to the Cyrex Array 10. And they do have a bundle package where you can do all of those together. Because many times a person won't go gluten-free unless you can prove that they have antibodies to peptides, and prove that, listen, every time you eat this, you're starting to fire in your gut. You need to deal with that. You need to calm that down. So that's why you need to do that. So Cyrex tests for those different peptides. So some people will go, this other lab, it's much less expensive, so I'd rather do that. Well, it's much less expensive for a reason. So if you really want to get better, and you really want to dig into your health, then you got to spend a little bit more and get good labs done. Otherwise, you're not going to get good answers. If you don't get good answers, you're going to be very frustrated. You're going to have questions like some of the people here do, like, "I've been dealing with this for X amount of years and nobody can figure me out." Well, maybe nobody can figure it out because they're not doing the right tests. So again, if you don't ask the right questions, you're not going to get the right answers. So, okay, next question. "I've recently seen videos and read a few articles discouraging eating rice and oatmeal for a variety of health reasons. What are your thoughts?" Well, I would agree. Rice, you could find a lot of data that rice contains a lot of heavy metals. You could find a lot of data that even organic rice contains heavy metals, and even organic oatmeal contains issues. Also, oatmeal can be a cross-contaminant for gluten, can be cross-contaminated with gluten because of where it's milled on the same mill. So if you have a gluten sensitivity, we need a gluten gliadin peptide sensitivity, and you're eating regular oatmeal, that could be an issue. Oatmeal that isn't organic is probably laden with GMOs, which is the number one cause of damaged guts. So there's lots of things that can be concerns with any types of grains, that not for everybody, but you have to be aware of those concerns, and that's where getting tested for antibodies for those things. But even if you don't have any antibodies for rice, you don't have any antibodies for pretend you don't have any antibodies for gluten and oatmeal and everything, you do have to be aware that you have to eat as clean of these foods as possible. So if you're just going to your local coffee shop and getting a oatmeal cup, it's probably not organic, therefore it's laden with GMOs, so it is going to damage your gut big time. Eating GMO food is equivalent to just taking an antibiotic, and it's that's what it does to your gut. So it can be very damaging. Okay, what is the? Did I finish that question? I think so. So next, what is the best approach for a nickel allergy? Contact dermatitis with chronic allergies right across the nutritious food spectrum. Okay, I don't think anybody has a nickel allergy. So let's address that first. Can you have a sensitivity to nickel? Yes, but it is usually because you have a toxicity to nickel. So nickel is a heavy metal. That's what it would be considered from a functional medicine perspective. I've had people with nickel issues because they had a nickel plate. So I remember one patient years ago had a nickel plate in his face because he was in a motorcycle accident or something like that. He had chronic headaches. We tested him with kinesiology. He had nickel toxicity, and there's really, I don't remember what we did for him. I don't think we helped him because you can't chelate that out if you got a 7-ounce plate of nickel in your body. It's very discouraging. So you really have to be careful when you do medical procedures that are putting things in your body that have the potential to become very toxic. So you can have a nickel toxicity and not have a nickel metal plate in your body either. You can have heavy metal toxicity due to exposure. You got it in a food, you got it in some chemical, some pesticide or something. A lot of pesticides have arsenic, a lot of pesticides have other heavy metals in them. That's how they work. And you're exposed to those things. I had one person that had lead and very serious aluminum toxicity, and he worked at an airlines and was drilling in aluminum aircrafts, for his job, 8 hours a day. He ended up having to go to Mayo and get EDTA IVs. He was so ill. But so heavy metal toxicity is real, and it is something that a lot of people need to address. I don't think it's an allergy, but it's a toxicity, and overexposure of it can cause allergic type reactions. Certainly can cause rashes, can cause headaches, can cause all sorts of different things. And can cause damage to the gut, which leads to the second half of this question with chronic allergies right across the nutritional food spectrum. So when a person does a food sensitivity test like we were talking about, like a Cyrex Array 10, and it becomes, so they have the Cyrex, the way that lab reads it is they have a column in green, which means you don't have any of those antibodies, yellow, which you have, a higher quantity of those than normal, and red, which is very out of range. When a person has, when you do that test and 70% of the food is on the red and yellow spectrum, that means that they have antibodies to those foods, but it really means that they have a very damaged gut. So a damaged gut, what's that? Leaky gut syndrome. Well, what's that? That means you have permeability of the gut. Your cells of your gut are supposed to be, tight together, and that junction of those two cells in the gut are epithelial cells form what's called a tight junction. Yes, the anatomists were not very creative in how they named that, but it was called a tight junction. But when that tight junction is damaged, and what damages it? Chemicals, toxicities, poisons, GMO foods, use of antibiotics, use of, exposure to consuming dyes and colorings and, chemicals in our food. I mean, you name it. Um, then that tight junction gets damaged, and that's what's called leaky gut. So things get across the gut that shouldn't get across the gut, and when things get across the gut that shouldn't get across the gut, remember you have two ways to get rid of bad things in your body. You either kill it through the immune response, or you have to detoxify it. So when toxins get across the body, they have to be detoxed through the liver and the kidneys through phase 1, 2, 3, and then what I've labeled 4, 5, 6 have to get out of the body. And in doing so, that's how you get rid of chemicals, heavy metals, like we were talking about, poisons. But when foods get across in forms that should never have got across, which we were speaking about before, like a larger peptide should never have got across the gut border, the immune system can react, and the immune system is basically like, what in the world is this? Let's make an antibody against it in order to kill it. Well, can you ever kill a food peptide? No, they're not. It's not a living organism. So if you have antibodies to peptides, what it's going to do is every time you eat that food again, you're just going to cause this inflammatory response. And when you cause that another inflammatory response, that's another way that you cause damage to the gut. So it's just this cycle, it's this negative cycle. That person, let's say, use gluten as an example, they have antibodies to gluten or gluten peptides. Every time they eat it, they cause more inflammation, it causes more damage. Now they have antibodies to protein, dairy proteins. Now they have continue to eat it, and continue to develop antibodies to other foods and more foods and more foods, and continue to have a more damaged gut. You have to break that cycle. So you have to start. If all you do when you do a food sensitivity panel is you stop eating that food, you're missing the whole point. You have to stop eating the food, because if you don't stop eating the food, you're just going to continue that negative cycle of inflammation every time you eat that food. But you have to heal the gut. If you're not taking different nutrition to help heal the gut, then you're never going to get better. So all you're going to do is you're going to eliminate, let's say, all the foods on the bad part, and then you retest in 3 to 6 months, and now you have antibodies to the foods that you were eating the last 3 to 6 months, because you never healed the gut. So you have to really work on healing the gut. It's a process. It takes time. It's not for the faint of heart, but if you aren't willing to do it, then don't complain about not getting better. Sorry, but that's just the way it is. So proper testing, get proper testing done. Find out what, where the damage is, what you truly have sensitivities to, eliminate those foods, and then, start doing things that are going to help heal that gut border, help improve those tight junctions, help stop this inflammatory process, and break that negative cycle in order for you to get better. I mean, it's not really rocket science. It's just a matter of doing the proper testing, finding out what's causing inflammation, finding out what the triggers are, getting rid of those, calming things down, using some things to help calm the inflammation down, and start healing. It's a process. So I go through a lot of this in agonizing detail in our courses, and I have multiple videos on a lot of these different things about when you have an autoimmune disease, how do you find your triggers? How do you find the thing that's causing inflammation? If I have microglial priming, what do you do to calm that down? What are the steps to do with that? And I try to break it down into baby steps so that you don't get overwhelmed. But that's the whole idea of the courses. It has a lot of education. I think the more you know, the better off you're going to be in a lot of different ways, the more you're going to know what to do. And I think there's benefit to knowing more so that you don't get duped by some of these Instagram and Facebook posts and practitioners that try to oversimplify, and then all you need to do is take this supplement or that supplement, and then you get very discouraged because it didn't work. So and when things don't work, it's easy to get bummed out and get discouraged. Okay. Um, Next question. All attempts over half my lifetime, 75 now, have failed to correct chronic fatigue. High dose vitamin C and quercetin have done nothing. No indications of any infectious disease like Lyme. Only clue I have is that my deep fatigue is very seasonal and it's at its worst right now, mid June. Thought I was on to something, thinking that spring was allergy season and nitric oxide production might be impeded in the nasal passages. Daily dose of fermented beet powder and other nitric oxide producers seemed to help at first, but then it didn't. More sun and more exercise just wear me out. Yeah. So I wish I had a dime for every time people ask questions like this because I feel so sad for them. Because this is kind of the state of what's going on. People are struggling because they're not getting answers. And again, I think you're not going to get answers if you're not finding somebody that's going to continue to ask the right questions. And I do feel bad because a lot of people will contact us and say, I can't afford to run these labs. I've spent all my money. And they've spent their money on getting promises like, oh, we're going to just do IV vitamin C and quercetin. Well, those are expensive things to do on a regular basis. But you got to dig to find the cost. So when you go, okay, what can be some possible issues with chronic overwhelming fatigue? Um, well, certainly post COVID, chronic viruses, including COVID, can link to that. Um, you have tested against you no indications of infectious diseases. I'd like to see what labs that this person ran. Um, uh, Chronic fatigue. So remember we talked about microglial priming and neurological functions. Um, that's something you always want to go back to because it's fairly easy to know if something has a cause in in the periphery or if something has a cause in what's called your upper motor neurons, or let's say your brain and spinal cord. So if your brain is at cause, the symptoms are going to be a little bit more vague. So put it this way: if I smash my toe and my toe is throbbing, I know the cause was I smashed my toe and my toe has to heal. Now, the pain that I feel in my toe is actually firing up my sensory neurons into my brain on the opposite side of my parietal lobe of my brain. That's where I actually feel the pain. But I know the cause because I know I smashed my toe. But let's say I have a little bit more vague symptoms. My toe hurts at different times, but sometimes it's not always my right toe. Sometimes it's my right knee, and sometimes things move around, like we talked about before. It's just a little bit more vague. Um, then you start thinking that it's more of an upper motor neuron. Is the inflammation actually in my brain? When you got more obvious upper motor neuron issues like fatigue, chronic fatigue, what could my chronic fatigue be? Well, years ago, people would just go, it's probably your adrenals, you got adrenal insufficiency. Well, maybe that's it, but you can easily test for that. Doing a 24-hour cortisol test and see your cortisol changes is a good test. Testing DHEA as well is a good test to test for that. I've had people with serious chronic fatigue, serious emotional issues, serious imbalances with mood issues, anxiety issues, but they have perfect cortisol balance. It's not their adrenals. They don't have adrenal burnout. It's not their pituitary. Could it be something else? We're digging to that. And most people that are in that category have serious gut inflammation. And remember, if you have a Cyrex Array 10 or a food sensitivity panel with a lot of things in the red and yellow, That means you have serious gut inflammation. And rule number one, if you have gut inflammation, you have brain inflammation. Then if you have brain inflammation, you could have the vaguest different types of symptoms that move around, peripheral symptoms that move around, and or symptoms that are acutely connected to brain inflammation, like fatigue or brain fog or loss of can't remember things, or um, obvious brain inflammation issues. So go back again go to our website, look up neural inflammation, and watch that video about microglial priming. I would, if you have the ability financially to do some tests, I would get antibody testing, again, Array 5 and Array 7X. That would be my go-to labs for a person that thinks they have chronic Lyme, like that other question before. A lot of people, again, like that, they attribute it to chronic Lyme. This person's question, they're saying they've investigated chronic Lyme, they don't think they have it. Which the truth is that if you've had this chronic fatigue for over half your life, you may have had a chronic Lyme incidence. There's no presence of even the IgG antibodies anymore because it's been so long. So it doesn't make a difference what that initial cause was. Now we know the cause of your symptoms is either antibodies to neural tissue or microglial priming, and you have to address that. So remember, if you have antibodies to neural tissue and or microglial priming, you're going to have symptoms based upon where in the brain that is taking place. Now, it's typically fairly diffuse through the brain, but you can have more inflammation at different parts of the brain. So one person can have more motor neuron issues and have more issues with motor function. Person can have issues with cerebellum, have more inflammation in the cerebellum. They might have coordination issues. Person can have issues in the parietal lobe, and they're going to have more sensory issues like pain and that moves around, and sensory things that move around. So again, asking the right questions, digging in, and doing the different tests that would be appropriate. Again, if you need help with any of these, and your finances are extremely limited, I say spend $50 and join the Chronic Disease and Autoimmune course. You can find that on our website, connorsclinic.com. Or if you want more specific help, feel free to self-schedule and schedule a case review with me, and I'll gladly help you work through these things. That's really what my job is to try to help you work through these things. It's I don't have a magic ball that tells me what everybody's problem is, but it's using the wisdom that you gain through increased knowledge and increased experience, you are able to try to point people in the right direction, and I'll just promise to try to do that the best way I can. So and you can also go to connorsclinic.com again, and there's plenty of blog posts on a lot of this stuff that will help you too. Okay. Next question. How long does it take for the Rife machine to cure an infection? Well, the Rife machine is not always going to cure an infection, first of all. Can the Rife machine really help with an infection, help with a virus, help with bacteria? Yes, it can. And we've had cases where it's literally miraculous. But sometimes you need to take an antibiotic. Sometimes you need to address, the immune system in other ways. So I highly caution people to rely on one thing at any given time. I think the Rife machine should be in everybody's house. I think everybody should have a true Rife machine, not just cancer patients, but I think it could be beneficial for your kids, it could be beneficial for your families. I think frequency medicine should be your first thing you go to. However, it's not a cure-all for everything. It's not a magic wand, and things do take time. Even if you properly diagnosed it and you are using the exact right frequency, it can still take time to heal. So That's why having it, not going to a practitioner's office, I think is much better. Related question, can you use the Rife machine on your pets? Yes, you can. But again, you need proper diagnosis, right? So, I mean, if you want your dog to the vet and the vet says your dog has kidney cancer, you can definitely run kidney cancer frequencies for your dog. It might have dramatic effects. If they say, if you know what's going on with your dog, or your dog has histamine issues and hives or something, you could certainly run the histamine programs on your dog. Again, you really can't hurt yourself running the Rife machine on anything. The only thing I caution you about is running gram-negative bacteria programs like Borrelia for Lyme. Borrelia is a gram-negative bacteria, and it kills the bacteria. It can kill it, and it can kill too quickly. When you kill a gram-negative bacteria too quickly, you'll generate a lot of lipopolysaccharides, and you could get a Herxheimer reaction. So that's the only thing I caution you about is if it is a gram-negative bacteria that you're suspecting, aka Lyme would be the most common, you got to go slow because you don't want to, to kill too quickly. You produce a lot of endotoxins, and you could feel lucky. Next question, is garlic a good substitute for a blood thinner? Well, legally, I can't say that you should change anything from a medical blood thinner if that's what you would prescribe. But from a nutritional perspective, garlic is probably the strongest blood thinner that exists from a nutritional dietary perspective. I would caution somebody who's on a blood thinner to not be taking too much garlic. You could have too much blood thinning and some capillary fragility and easy bruising and things. That's what you should be looking for. Garlic is not only a natural blood thinner, but it is a really good thing to kill infections in the blood. People that have issues with heart valve issues, which is not uncommon, especially with people with cardiomegaly, enlarged hearts. Taking garlic can be beneficial. The thing you have to be careful with is garlic is a Th1 stimulator. That means it's an immune stimulator. So if you do have an autoimmune disease, you can't take garlic on a regular basis anyhow. So you'll be helping your body kill that which you have antibodies against, which is your own tissue. So you could use it for a short period of time. Like any immune stimulants, if you have an autoimmune disease, it doesn't mean you can never take immune stimulators. I think you're coming down with a cold or something. But you wouldn't take it long term. And I think that's about all we have time for our call today. Remember, go to Holistic Health Hour for all our past calls. We have all indexed really nice, holistichealthhour.com. And that's where you can ask your questions, which the questions that came in, other than the blog, the chat questions, we were able to get to today. Go to huntersclinic.com if you want to find out more information about us, you want to see all our blog posts and videos. You can find it on there and download the books and get our courses and a whole bunch of stuff. So, all right, God bless. Everybody have a great day. See you next week.